Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, we're going to try that again. Good evening. All right. I'm Deacon Brent, and I am a sinner. No, I'm not going to go to confession. Y'all don't have time for that. But there's a reason why I say that. And I'm going to tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting with some friends, and we were doing some planning. It was kind of a committee thing. And we started talking about getting people to volunteer to do things. Sometimes you have to ask people to volunteer. They don't just step up on their own. And the most common answer that we normally hear when we ask someone to be an extraordinary minister or a reader, a lector, a commentator, or even to pass collection, a lot of times, the majority of the time, we're going to hear them say, well, I would love to do that, but I'm so unworthy. Well, that's the most true statement we can make, because we're all unworthy. We're all sinners. And it's the truth that we're unworthy to serve God. We're unworthy to be here even. But because God calls us, it makes us worthy. You see, when we come to Mass, this should be like a Sinners Anonymous meeting. And somebody told me this morning, but it's not all anonymous because we know people. But this should be a Sinners Anonymous. See, we come here to find holiness. We come here because we're on this path to Jesus Christ. We want to go to be in that kingdom of God. We want to get to heaven. That's why we come. We have the sacrament of reconciliation, confession, for those times that we fall, because we are going to fall. And we are going to be unworthy. But Jesus tells us in the gospel that anything is possible with God. And God can call us and make us worthy to serve Him and to serve His church. Isn't that an awesome thought? God can make us worthy to do the things that He needs us to do. He can make us worthy to be able to live in His will, to do His will for others. You see, in the gospel today, Jesus talk about this young man, and I'm not going to go line for line, but this young man comes up to Jesus and he says, "What do I have to do to inherit eternal life?" Well, basically, Jesus could have said nothing, because I'm going to do it for you. But that's not what he said. He said, "Well, you must live the commandments." And the young man said, "Well, I've done that since my youth." And trust me, if you really look at the commandments, we're not living the commandments. Because when you get down to the details, we probably break most of them. But Jesus told him that. He says, you must live the commandments. And he goes through them. And the young man says, "Well, I do that." He says, "Well, you only lack one thing." He said, "Go off and sell everything you have and give to the poor." And he says that the young man's face fell. Now, this is where I had a problem this week, because y'all know how I read. Sometimes I don't read exactly what's on the page. So when I read this, I read that it said that he had many things that possessed him. That's what kind of hit me. And it's not about the things he possessed. That's not what's going to keep us from heaven. It's the things that we have that possess us. It's those things in our life that come between us and our relationship with God. And I'm going to give you a small example of what I'm talking about, and it's probably the most common. How many people can leave home without their cell phone? How many people can say, even if you don't need it to work, but when you leave home and your cell phone is there, you turn around and you go get it, because I can't be without my cell phone. I kind of wondered for a while how cars actually ran without phones, because you're driving on the road and everybody's talking on the phone. It seems like you need it to run your car. But our phone, this thing that was meant to serve us, is now having us to serve it. We have become a slave to our phone. If we can't leave that phone alone for a day, if we can't walk away from that phone for a while, I've become a slave to that phone. It now possesses me. And that's an example. I'm not saying that cell phones are bad. It is if it becomes an addiction. It is if we can't leave it alone. And you see, I need my phone to work with. But if I leave home in the morning and I'm heading to home and I realize that I had left my phone at home, I'm not going to turn around and go get it. Because everybody that's going to contact me is going to be at the office. So I'm not going to turn around and go get that phone, because I refuse to be mastered by something in my life. Now, when I get on the road after I leave the office, I'm going to go pick it up because I will need it during the day. But that's just a small example of how we can let things in our life possess us. Things that we're supposed to possess, but yet they possess us. They're going to get in the way of our relationship with Jesus Christ. And it's not just things. Sometimes it could be people. And Jesus is telling us that we need to rid ourselves of these possessions, of these things that possess us. Because he's asking us to surrender these things. See, that he was calling this young man to be one of his disciples. Because he said, come and follow me. He loved this young man. He thought that he would probably be a really good disciple. Except that he had too many possessions. Or he had too many things possessing him. See, Jesus Christ calls us to surrender things every day. And when I was preparing, I was reminded of one of the talks that I listened to, and this guy that was giving the talk says he has a poster or a plaque on his wall in his office, and it says, just when I think I've surrendered everything, he asked me for something I'm not ready to give up. You see, we need to look into our lives and see what those things are that interfere with our relationship with God, with our relationship with Jesus Christ. See, because he's asking us to surrender these things, to get these things out of our way, because love is a 100% deal. We can't give just a little bit love to God, because he didn't give just a little bit love to us. He gave everything to us. And the awesome phrase, and every time I say it, it blows me away, is that God loved us first. And all he's asking us to do is to love him back. He's asking us to follow his commandments. He's asking us to get rid of those things in our life that interfere with that relationship. See, that's why we come to this Sinners Anonymous meeting. And that's why we come here to receive Jesus Christ, to learn more about Jesus Christ, so that we can take him out into the world, because he's calling each and every one of us to be a disciple. See, the other part of the gospel that kind of takes me away is that when Jesus talks about that how hard it is for a rich man to get into heaven, he says it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Well, I'm going to tell y'all, I'm a very visual, literal person, and I was thinking, wait, this little needle thing, I can barely get the thread through that. How can you pass a camel? So I had to go look it up and see what he was talking about. And this is one of those instances where you can't just read what's on the page and relate it to today's life, because the eye of a needle was a gate into the city. See, back then they had to build walls around their cities because they kept getting invaded by other countries or other clans or whatever it was. So they had to protect themselves. So they built these walls around the city. So they had this one gate that was called the eye of a needle. And this is where the camels came through. Now, the way they built this gate is kind of a little funny deal. It kind of comes to a crescent-type point. And what they would do is that when you came in with a caravan, you were taxed by the number of camels you had. So if you didn't have to bring all your camels into the city, you could kind of overload one of them and maybe eliminate one. But you see, when they built this gate, that overloaded camel couldn't make it through. So you still had to carry it in. So Jesus is telling us that we can't cheat God. You see, we can have $1 billion in the bank, but as long as that $1 billion doesn't own me, I can still make it to heaven. He's not saying that rich people won't go to heaven. But what he's saying is that if the things that we own us, that it's easier for that camel. And that camel, he can't duck and squeeze and all of this kind of stuff. And that's what he's talking about the eye of the needle. See, that's one of those things that you have to go back and look at what was really going on in his time. But Jesus is calling us to be honest with him, to give up those things in our life that interfere with that relationship. And also this week I was thinking about this song, and I don't remember the artist, and I'm not going to sing it, trust me. But there's a verse in that song where he says, Lord, take away my life, when I'm not strong enough to give it up to you. Lord, take away my life when I'm not strong enough to give it up to you. Because, see, we're weak. We know we're going to sin. We know we're going to continue to fall. But God is there at every step of the way to help us back up, because He wants to have that relationship with us. He called us to be here with Him. He loved us first. You see, in the first reading, it talks about wisdom and how important wisdom was, and how they valued wisdom, and it was greater than jewels and all of this kind of stuff. Well, we can replace the word wisdom with faith, because our faith is supposed to be that wisdom that brings us back to God. And our faith is supposed to be the most important thing in our life. Our faith in God, our faith in Jesus Christ, and our faith in His church. That's what we're supposed to be living by. It's supposed to be the guide that brings us through the day. We're supposed to give up those things that interfere with that faith. Jesus Christ is asking us to give up that sin that we commit. See, every day when we look in the mirror, well, after we've said our half an hour of prayer, we look in the mirror, we're supposed to ask ourselves, what is Jesus asking me to give up today? What can I do today that's going to help me get closer to Jesus Christ? And just like the saying on that guy's wall, just when I think I've surrendered everything, He asked me for something I'm not ready to give up. What is it in our lives that we're not ready to give up? What is it in our lives that we think that we have to hold on to more than our relationship with God? More than our relationship with Jesus Christ? See, when we look in that mirror, we're the only one that can answer that question. God is calling each and every one of us to surrender to Him, to be His disciple, to carry His message out to those who don't know it, just by the way we live. We have to ask ourselves, what is Jesus Christ asking me to give up today? What is it in my life that interferes with that relationship? See, because just when I think I've surrendered everything, He's going to ask me for something I'm not ready to give up. What is He asking for?